Hey guys, welcome to another edition of the Talking Metal podcast. We have got a great episode for you today. This is an epic episode celebrating one of the greatest rock managers of all time, Mr. Bill Aucoin. Today is his birthday, and we are just celebrating all things Bill. He did so many great things with bands like Kiss, Billy Squier, Manowar, Lordi. The list goes on and on. Of course, Billy Idol, instrumental in Billy Idol's career. And we're going to talk about all that stuff. And we're going to end today's episode with a vintage Talking Metal interview that we did with Bill back in 2008. That's going to end the episode, and you got to stay tuned for that because it's great, and it's there's so much good stuff in it. It's actually been quoted in books. The Van Halen book that Greg Renoff put together uses some quotes from this interview. It is historic, so stay tuned for that. And we're also going to hear from somebody who knew Bill like no one else, and he's here with me now, Roman Fernandez. Roman, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Mark, and thank you very much for doing this, man. I greatly appreciate it.
You bet. And we're going to get into a in-depth conversation with you in just a bit about Mr. Bill Aucoin. But before we do that, you know, you are a guy who's been keeping Bill's name alive, keeping the awareness of Bill going. And can you just tell us a little bit about what the main cause is here and who's possibly helping you with Bill Aucoin's awareness campaign, if you will?
Well, you know, this really kind of all got started in 2014 when it was first announced that Kiss was going to be inducted, which, as you know, was a huge surprise because most people thought, including Bill, thought that Kiss would never be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Right.
And so when that was announced, you know, people started saying, well, you know, is Bill getting inducted? And hey, Bill should be inducted. And of course, I felt that way, but, you know, as you might imagine, my opinion's very biased. And it was just kind of, you know, tossed around here and there. And it was about a year and a half ago that me and a buddy of mine, who was actually a very good friend of Bill's and also used to be the manager for Enough's Enough.
Cool.
That's a guy by the name of Tom Feely. Yeah. And Tom Feely and I got to talk, and we said, yeah, you know, this could really be something. So we've kind of gone around over the course of the last year and a half to different Kiss expos and different conventions. And we set up what we call the Bill Aucoin booth. And it's really just kind of an awareness campaign where people can sign a petition to raise awareness to get Bill inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And lots of credit to Tom Feely, by the way, because, there's a lot of these conventions that go around all year long, and I can't make all of them. And Tom makes it a point to get to pretty much every one, and he's done them from New York to L.A. and in between, and went as far as Melbourne, Australia this year to do one. So I try to make it to as many as I can, but when I can't, he often goes in my place. So props to him for that.
Cool. Are either of you guys going to be at the Atlanta Kiss Expo, which is coming up in just about a month from now?
I don't think we're going to be at that one.
Okay.
I believe there's something else happening later in the year, but I don't believe we're going to be at Atlanta.
Cool. Well, Roman, I tell you what, I want to hear all about your time with Bill. No one knew Bill better than you. You were his partner for many, many years, and let's bring you back in just a bit and get into a true discussion about the great Bill Aucoin here on Talking Metal, one of the greatest rock managers of all time. And, you know, so many acts he worked with, but the two that probably are bigger than most are Kiss, of course, and Billy Idol. And I was just reading about Bill in Billy Idol's book. Have you read Billy Idol's book?
I have not.
No.
I've read the excerpts, a couple of excerpts where he talks about Bill very eloquently and accurately, and I think actually it's some of the best pages I think that have been written about Bill. Yeah. So kudos to Idol for that.
Well, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to play a song right now. It's called White Wedding by Billy Idol, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to actually do what you just said. I'm going to read some pages out of Billy Idol's book for the Talking Metal listeners to hear Billy Idol, in his own words, as read by me, talk about Bill Aucoin. And then we're going to come back after that, and we'll hear some more from Roman, who is joining us on this show. And again, we'll end today's episode with the 2008 interview that John Ostrosky, a.k.a. Ostronomy, and I did with Bill Aucoin in his office in New York City. So here we go, guys. Roman, please
Awesome.
come back with me in just a bit, and we'll talk all about Bill. But right now, this is White Wedding by Billy Idol, followed by Billy Idol's words on Bill Aucoin from his autobiography. Here we go, guys. Billy Idol talks about Bill Aucoin throughout his book. Again, his book is called Dancing with Myself by Billy Idol, his autobiography. And this is just 2 pages from his book. It is page 138, 139, and 140. Actually, 3 pages. Got to do the math there. 3 pages, yeah. So anyways, this is Billy Idol, in his own words, talking about Bill Aucoin and Kiss a little bit. And again, he mentions Bill Aucoin throughout his book, so definitely do yourself a favor and read the whole thing. Again, the book is called Dancing with Myself by Billy Idol. Great, great read by a rock icon. And here we go, page 138 through 140 of the book. Confident or not, I knew New York City was a place that could chew you up and spit you out as easily as a bullfrog catches a fly with its long tongue, digesting it quickly before shitting out the unwanted part. Would I end up disposed of? It was definitely a possibility. Just because I had a couple of hits in England didn't mean the teeming masses of Americans would see anything in me. Given what happened on these shores to the Sex Pistols, the likelihood of this English punk being embraced stateside seemed pretty remote. I thought Johnny Rotten and company would blaze a trail, but they came back in tatters. Nobody else had really made a dent, though the Clash were still trying. Despite being aware of this ominous history, I felt I had a strong team around me. Chrysalis Records had some success with Blondie in the U.S. and seemed to know their business. My manager, Bill Aucoin, had achieved massive success with Kiss, so I was with people who had a track record. Bill Aucoin was a true maverick, a wild man of rock and roll. He was a force of nature. He'd become my mentor. When he got excited about an artist, he loved the selling part of his job. He could step into a meeting and take a room full of people with no interest in me and turn them around. He'd tell label executives what they needed to do by giving them a new vision. Then he would tell them how to use their standing in the industry to contribute or even change popular culture in a positive way. He had them eating out of his hand. Then he would explain how I played into this vision. It was all going to be guaranteed success and fun to boot. He would become more animated until they were infected by his wild enthusiasm. You can't be afraid, he'd tell them. You got to step it up. Billy is the real deal. By the time he was finished, they were true believers, lit up like Christmas trees and promising Bill anything. The man's sales pitch was an incredible performance in and of itself, and I would have to go some distance to beat his energy in the boardroom with my own actions on stage. The execs in the room ended up raving too. That was Bill Aucoin, from 0 to 100 miles per hour in the span of a pitch meeting. At the time, Bill was a slender man in his mid-30s, about my height. His upper lip was adorned with a mustache, and he usually wore an amused look, especially when he was enthused about a subject. He would tell me Jim Morrison wasn't afraid to be himself. He told me about seeing the Doors in New York in the 60s, when Jim let a member of the audience give him a blowjob on stage. This was a defining and liberating moment in Bill's life, encouraging him to accept the fact he was gay and realizing he had to be true to his own inner being. Bill loved this wild bravado in an artist. He would often talk to me about the kind of energy and feelings an audience would respond to. "Billy, you gotta be wild and crazy," he would tell me, and I've never forgotten those words. I was actually committed to being true to myself, but now I was feeling liberated as well. I was pushing a boundary, both physical and mental, where the emotions were channeled to reach a positive, uplifting experience for the audience and for me. I knew what he meant, and I saw the truth in his words. The next day, I jumped on a bus that took me near the 57th Street offices of Chrysalis Records, not far from where I was headed, Bill Aucoin's office. The people on the bus were quite amusing. I don't think even blasé. New Yorkers were used to seeing someone dressed in an English-style punk rock clothes, let alone someone as clad as I was, in skin-tight leather pants and a ripped T-shirt that revealed my chest and body, along with a New Romantics teased cape slung around my shoulders over a leather jacket, bondage boots, and spiked bleach white hair. As I walked along 57th Street, the black guys on the corner would go, "Silky baby," or "Where's the party?" Or "Punk rock don't stop," which happened to be a key line in Blondie's Rapture, but would also later give me the idea for the title of the EP I would record early the next year. These new greetings and sayings in all the different accents seemed fresh to me. Walking into Aucoin's office, I tried to act normal as I could. The fact is, I had arrived in New York suffering from serious heroin withdrawal. I had taken so much before I left. I had a bad skin reaction. Scabs covered my face, and I had an extreme case of constipation. Bill Aucoin was a bit shocked at how I looked, which was something, because he was a hard guy to shock. I did have a 3-week supply of DF 118s, an H substitute, like methadone, that was used for getting over the initial cold turkey reaction. The DFs kept me functioning, and some booze quelled most of the clammy sweats and general discomfort. I took speed to counteract how sick I felt and to keep up with the New York pace. I looked around Aucoin's giant office, which had Kiss doll puppets hanging from the walls, and I met Bill's secretary, who suggested an enema. Bill's second-in-command was a guy named Rick Alabriti, who suggested that I brush my hair down like Rick Springfield, pointing out how well he had done with his clean-cut image and hit Working Class Dog album. "I'm not turning into David Cassidy," I said. I was sticking with the look I had. I wasn't starting all over to deny my style, but to make it stick. Punk was my roots, and I would celebrate those roots for the rest of my so-called career. I told myself it was weird but fun to be challenged on my belief. Maybe I was naive, but I was confident that I knew what was right for me, and I wasn't going to let anybody else make decisions like that when it came to my career. The attitude was further cemented in my mind when later that week I saw Bo Diddley playing at Trax, a small club on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. Despite feeling like crap, I spent the evening enjoying one of the greats of early rock and roll. Jesus, he was still playing that red box-shaped guitar from the 50s with its built-in sound effects, which doubly empowered me not to change my own image. America would have to accept my style instead of the poodle head look all the U.S. mainstream bands of the early 80s had back then. Bill Aucoin kept telling me I should try out a guitarist by the name of Steve Stevens, who was leaving a band, the Fine Malibus. I met Steve in Aucoin's office, and we had a heartfelt discussion about rock and roll stardom, the meaning of punk, and what I wanted to do with my music. My idea was to incorporate the energy and spirit of punk into many different musical settings. Steve responded well and said he'd help me put together a band. For the moment, we decided to take it one step at a time and see where it would all lead. I now had a lead on an exciting new collaborator, but I was still feeling relatively unsure about the musical direction to focus on next. This would change after one particular night that summer. I was missing Perry terribly.
I decided to head out to a club hurrah on West 62nd Street to take my mind off of her and drown my sorrows. I entered the club and stood by the crowded bar. The place was jammed with people listening to a DJ. Several deep at the bar. It was hard to get a space. I was finally able to order a screwdriver and, once served, hung back with my drink to check out the not-so-bad-looking birds hanging around. The energy in the place was palatable, but nothing special. Suddenly, the DJ played Dancing with Myself. I watched in amazement at the previously crowded bar area empty and people literally throw themselves over tables, chairs, and couches to get to the dance floor. As the song continued, I was practically the only one left at the now empty bar. Jesus, that's it, I realized. I had the answer all the time. The dance beat we put into Dancing with Myself was right. The place was going nuts for it. I left the club excited and confident. If I could find something else with a beady drums for Keith Fosseret to produce. Anyways, you get the idea. I think he's kind of trailed off the Bill stuff here, but yeah, cool. So that's a little bit of Billy Idol's mentions of Bill, which happened throughout his book, which I just read from, Dancing with Myself. Do yourself a favor and go pick that book up, especially if you're a Bill Aucoin fan. Hey guys, a little Billy Idol here on Talking Metal. You know, just on a side note, just kind of random, I know we're celebrating Bill today, but do yourself a favor, check out some of Steve Stevens' other work. I mean, that stuff he did with Vince Neil, some of that guitar playing is absolutely incredible. I am a big fan of the Steve Stevens album that he did with Terry Bozzio. Black Light Syndrome, it's called, and actually I think he did two albums. It was Bozzio, Levin, Stevens, and yeah, Black Light Syndrome, that first record from 1997, just love that. But Stevens, of course, played with Michael Jackson, Billy Idol, Vince Neil on that Exposed record, highly overlooked. I think he even did a little work on Give 'Em Hell by Sebastian Bach. So much good stuff Steve Stevens has given us through the years, not just with Billy Idol. So do yourself a favor and check out some more of his catalog. And today we are celebrating Bill Aucoin's birthday, December 29th. One of the greatest rock managers of all time. And yeah, Bill Aucoin would have been today 74 years old. So happy 74th birthday to Bill Aucoin. Rest in peace, the great Bill Aucoin. Stay tuned for our interview with Bill Aucoin from 2008 coming up soon. And on this epic episode right now, we're going to get into my interview with Roman, who you heard from earlier in the podcast. He was Bill's partner for many years. He's going to tell us the whole story here. And I'll have that picture of Bill in the pyramid up on the show notes on talkingrock.net or talkingmetal.com. Just look for the show notes, and you can make a support. You can support the show while you're there. PayPal donations, use our Amazon links, and Patreon is happening. Anything you can do to support what we do here is greatly appreciated. I also wanted to give a plug to my new YouTube show, The Mark and Mitch Show. It's Mark Strigl and Mitch LaFon just talking rock on our YouTube show. We just had a great discussion on Van Halen. Of course, we're talking Kiss a lot of the time, Maiden, Ozzy, Guns N' Roses, all our favorites, Metallica. So, yeah, check that out, The Mark and Mitch Show, now on YouTube. All right, without further ado, here's one of my favorite Kiss songs, Sweet Pain, followed by my interview with Roman, here on Talking Metal.
Hey, it's Mark Strigl of the Talking Metal Podcast, and calling in on the line, we have Roman Fernandez. Roman, how are you?
Good, sir. How you doing, Mark?
I'm great, and it's a pleasure to speak with you because you were the longtime partner of one of the greatest rock and roll managers of all time. I mean, when you think of, Colonel Parker, Peter Grant, Brian Epstein, another name that fits right in there with those is, of course, Bill Aucoin, mostly known for his work with Kiss and Billy Idol and so many others. And you were Bill's partner for a number of years. Can you talk a little bit about your history with Bill, how you guys first met, and how long were you a couple?
We were together for about 15 or 16 years. I think either one of us was never really quite sure of the date, but it was around 94, 95 when we first met, and I was working with a band down here. I was actually playing in a band down here in South Florida, in Miami. And he had flown down to check out the group, and he started working with us, and we probably were talking or working together for, I'm going to guess, anywhere between 5 or 6 months before we actually became a couple.
Right.
And eventually, I would leave the band after a year or two in favor of following my own career and in favor of pursuing a relationship with him, which was a little bit weird. When you're in a band and you're dating the manager,
right.
It tends to be a little bit strange. So that's kind of how things got started.
And he was obviously based in New York at that time, but I believe eventually he ends up in Florida, or I'm not sure if that's right. Did he eventually move to Florida?
Yeah, he did. I think maybe close to a year after the time that we started seeing each other, I had a place on the beach with my roommate, Kathy, and he would come down and he'd spend, a week at a time or whatever at the apartment. And eventually, I think little by little, it's one of those things where, he might bring a suitcase with some stuff and then some of the stuff remains behind. And next trip, he brings more stuff and eventually there's a toothbrush. And that's kind of when you start sealing the deal, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but it was over a little bit of time, but it was probably about a year or year and a half after we first hooked up that he made the full-time move to Florida.
And was he still maintaining an office in New York at that time? Because I know I interviewed Bill, I think it was like 2008 or something, and he had an office in Long Island City at that point.
Long Island City. Yeah, no, in the beginning he didn't. In the beginning, I think he was kind of out of the industry for quite a while. I'd heard at the time, but in retrospect, I know that he had interest in a couple of groups. I think a couple in New York, certainly one in New York called Gun Hill Road, and maybe another one out in L.A. And he would, from time to time, before we met, I think, check out certain groups and maybe give advice. But I don't think he was full time into it. It wasn't until he moved to South Florida, and I'm trying to recollect, but I'm guessing if we met around 94, 95, and he moved down around 96, 97, it was probably around 1998 that he actually opened an office in South Florida.
Okay.
It was a production company called Splash that he really, I think for the first time in a while, had a proper, business operation with an office.
Okay, so you guys first met and soon after started dating. We're talking mid-90s? Right, mid-90s, okay. So he, at this point, I mean, we know he was incredibly successful with Kiss in the 70s and even into the early 80s, and then just took on Billy Idol when Billy Idol was at the top of his career. Bill Aucoin was with Billy Idol for a lot of that time. What year did Bill kind of leave the music business? Because you mentioned that he kind of went back into the music business at some point. Do you know what year he actually officially kind of walked away from the music business?
It's hard to say. I think Billy Idol the end of Billy Idol the end of the relationship between him and Idol, which came, of course, after he and Kiss had been done, was probably in the mid-'80s.
Okay.
So I think shortly after that is probably when he walked away. So I would call it maybe there was a 10-year gap in between. And I know obviously from being with Bill and speaking to friends after we lost him, that he was working on numerous projects, not necessarily music related, although there'd usually be some kind of music component, but kind of had his hand in, I think, maybe some film developments, developing other businesses that may actually be outside of music altogether. So he kind of had his hands in a couple of things, but never really, I think, full-time in music, not till, like I said, the mid-'90s or so.
Right. Because he started as a TV guy, I believe, right? And
yeah,
at least according to Paul Stanley's autobiography.
Yeah, and I haven't read it, but it's true, and I think a lot about his TV career hasn't been brought to light, which is pretty fascinating. Bill actually got his start on TV. Ironically, it should have been right after he graduated from Northeastern University. He had gone to NBC, and I think he had met with the president of NBC some years prior to graduation, who had said to him, "Listen, when you graduate, come by, and we'll have a job here waiting for you." And as the story goes, and this comes from his sister Betty, who I'm very close to, apparently went to NBC and met with the president. I forget his name, Colonel something or the other at the time, and went up and said, "Hey, listen, you're supposed to have a job for me." And the guy said, "Yeah, listen, we're going to put you in sales." And Bill turned it down because Bill wanted to be part of the creative process. He wanted to work in production. So he ended up turning down who knows what a career at NBC might have looked like for Bill. But he ended up then going to WGBH in Boston, and he interned over there as a cameraman working on the Julia Child show, The French Chef. And that's really kind of where he cut his teeth. And ironically, the lighting director over there was Kenny Anderson, who, I don't know if you're familiar, but Kenny Anderson would eventually be hired by Rocksteady Productions to become the production manager for Kiss.
Wow. Okay.
So TV was really a start, and he worked at the Julia Child show. Eventually, Bill started his own production company. He did a ton of commercials. He was a Clio Award-winning producer. And his work doing TV commercials is when he met Joy Bogart at the time, or actually Joyce Bywitz. I'm sorry.
Right.
Joyce Bywitz at the time. And they became partners in this production company. And they put on quite a few productions, including the show that eventually would be Gene's calling card, if you will, was Flipside. Bill had a pretty interesting career in TV, and not to mention working on the Bobby Kennedy presidential campaign.
Wow.
He did quite a bit of stuff.
I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. Actually, a little known story that again most people don't know, and it seems almost unbelievable at the time. But in 1973, I'm not sure if this was before Flipside or after Flipside, he developed a show called Saturday Night at the Movement. Now, if that rings a bell, it's because it was a show which was supposed to air on Saturday nights. It was meant to be live, and it was going to be kind of a variety show with up-and-coming comics, musical guests, et cetera, et cetera. Apparently, he had pitched it to a bunch of stations, I guess to all the major networks, and it was turned down by everybody. And not a year or two later, what comes on air but Saturday Night Live, which was a direct, let's call it a facsimile of what Saturday Night at the Movement was. And it's funny, for a long time I thought this show was only theorized. It turns out the actual pilot was shot with a full cast, with a musical guest, who I'm not exactly sure who the musical guest was, but somewhere out there is a pilot to Saturday Night at the Movement, which was, again, a precursor to Saturday Night Live.
Wow. And
Yeah.
I wonder if...
When you talk about being a visionary, I mean, I think that pretty much kind of puts everything into perspective.
Yeah, it makes you wonder if some exec at NBC or somewhere had Bill's idea in their mind and
you gotta wonder.
Yeah.
Stranger things have happened, so I wouldn't be surprised.
Briefly, you mentioned he was involved with Bobby Kennedy's campaign. So was he out traveling with Senator Kennedy?
Yes.
Or
yes.
Really? Wow. Okay.
I actually spoke to somebody at the production company that was producing a series of, I think it was promo shorts for Bobby's campaign. And yeah, Bill was one of the camera guys, and he would travel on location wherever Bobby was, and shot Bobby. Well, that's a terrible choice of words.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean. He was responsible for photographing or filming Bobby Kennedy. So yeah, I mean, he had quite a run, and you know, I think Bill's primary passion was really TV and film. I think that's probably what he was destined to do, or I think that's what he thought he was destined to do, because he was a very visual guy, which you know, it's no accident that Kiss was the band that he ended up looking after, because Kiss was obviously a very visual band.
Sure.
I mean, Kiss without the visuals would still be a great rock act, but it's that visual dimension, I think, that made the band larger than life, and I think Bill was very much attracted to that, and I think it came naturally for him to develop a group of that ilk.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much great stuff in all the books that the guys have written about, you know, Paul, Gene, Ace, and Peter have all written their own autobiographies. And honestly, you know, they bitch and complain about so many different people in the book, but off the top of my head, I really think they all speak highly of Bill in the books, especially even the Peter book. He just loved Bill so much. Did you ever have a chance to meet Peter? I mean, when Bill died, did they all come down and?
Yeah, well, I've actually met all the guys, and Peter in particular. And not to take anything away from the other guys, but I've become very close. Not so much close with Peter. Peter and I are good friends, but me and Gigi are very, very close. And Peter in particular has been extremely vocal about Bill's hand in Kiss and what Bill meant to Peter. So yeah, he's been a great advocate of Bill's, and I know Paul and Gene and Ace have had great words to say about Bill as well. But Peter and Peter's camp is the one that I'm probably closest to, and yeah, he's been uber supportive, as Gigi. So
right.
much
Peter's
much
wife,
prop
Gigi.
to those guys. Yeah.
And when you started dating Bill and had, well, throughout your relationship, and if this is too personal, you're welcome to pass on it, but did he bring up the past a lot? Did he talk about his time as a manager of Kiss and Billy Idol?
No, you know, listen, that's actually a great question, and I'm pretty candid about that stuff.
Sure.
Look, at when I was starting in the band that Bill was flying down to look after, we were into our second gig, and I have known these guys in the band for years. We had jammed together in our garages and stuff, and but it was only the second night that the band was really together, or really our second gig. We had two gigs back to back when we first started out, and Bill came to the first and the second gig. And I remember Derek Cintron, who was really the leader of the group, and a longtime buddy of mine, who had said, listen, we've got this manager coming to see us, Bill Aucoin. And I didn't know who Bill Aucoin was, partly because I was never a huge Kiss fan. I didn't grow up on Kiss. So I was completely clueless as to who this guy was, and I thought I'd do a little bit of research. And back then we didn't have computers,
Right.
So I had to go to the library and pull microfiche out and go looking for old news stories on Bill. And so I learned a little bit about him that way, and I'd say the very beginning, the first few months that we were working together, Kiss never really came up, at least not that I can recall. And it wasn't really for a while. Bill didn't really talk about the past very much, and I've never been very interested in the past as it pertains to Bill or myself. I'm not very nostalgic that way.
Okay.
I like to be more concerned about the present and the future. So Bill didn't bring that stuff up when he and I were alone. There were a few times that I would ask, and I'd have legitimate questions out of curiosity or whatnot. But it was he mostly would talk about Kiss when we were in a group setting, either with my friends or his friends, or if we were with fans, that the Kiss equation would come up, and then he'd certainly answer whatever questions were asked. But if it was just the two of us, like over dinner or whatever, not really. He would speak a lot more about his relationships with people like Joyce, for instance, who he thought the world of, and Sean Delaney.
Yes.
We talked about Sean a lot, and we tried to plan meeting up with Sean at some point while we were together. Sean was a little bit elusive at that time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he was living in northern England for a good period of time. So the past as it pertains to Kiss didn't really come up a lot unless we were in a group environment. And it was kind of funny because oftentimes when people asked, Bill would kind of start by rolling his eyes. But then once he started getting into a story, he was full on and he would get into it. And
Yeah.
he had a good time, I think, reminiscing about the past. It's just not something that on a practical level, day to day, we would talk about.
Sure. And so he was interested in managing the band you were with at that time. And was this the start of him kind of going back into the music industry?
Yeah, I would think so. I'm thinking back 20 years now, but if memory serves me correctly, when he came down and started working with us, he was at the same time keeping an eye out on this group called Gun Hill Road from New York.
Who I've heard of.
And yeah, they were. I don't know how popular they were in New York, but they came down to South Florida and they made a good dent. But that group followed Bill. When Bill moved down here, within 5 months, the whole band had moved down here.
Wow.
And so then Bill was working with us. He was working with Gun Hill. Then he started working with Flip at the same time, which is a band out of Minneapolis. I don't know if you're familiar with them. Again, another very visual group.
Right.
And then there were two other bands out of South Florida that he also had an interest in. So it seemed like once he moved down, within a matter of 4 to 5 months, all of a sudden he was deeply immersed in the music industry again. And before you know it, I mean, people like Jack Douglas were showing up and Bob Ezrin. Many of these people who I didn't know who they were, which is ironic considering I've been a music guy most of my life. Well, I knew Jack Douglas because I was a huge fan of Cheap Trick, and Aerosmith, and I know he had done those records.
Yep.
But yeah, it seemed like within months he was jumping into the deep end of the pool, and all of a sudden, he was back into it, and I was surrounded by this whole new world. Or it was not a new world, but it was certainly on a much grander scale.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the band Lordi? Now that would have been with your time with Bill, and talk about a visual band. He was managing them, I believe, up until his death. Does that sound right?
Well, not quite.
Okay.
He started working with them right after they won the Eurovision Song Contest. I forget exactly how the call came in, but I know that Mr. Lordi, the lead singer and really the mastermind of the group, I believe he was the head of the Kiss Army in Finland. So it's no huge leap to go from Lordi to Bill Aucoin, considering that was Mr. Lordi's, thing was
Right.
Kiss. I believe Kiss is what motivated him to go into this line of work. So I think Bill and Lordi started working together. It might have been around, because I think he started that office. That was a Coin Globe, right, in Long Island City.
Yes.
And I believe that was probably in 2005, maybe 2006. And it was probably about a year after that. If Lordi won the contest in 2006, then it was probably around 2006, 2007 that they started working together. Bill actually worked with them, put them on tour. I think they went on Ozfest.
Yeah, I saw them on Ozfest. Yeah, it was like
right,
100 degrees out, and they were out there with those costumes on. That just
up there in Jersey, you mean? Or?
Yeah. It was a great show, but I couldn't help but
honestly,
thinking.
I can't imagine. Actually, I went to that show.
Oh, were you at that show?
I believe I was. Yeah.
PNC Arts Center in Central Jersey. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, and Bill actually toured Japan with them. He was deeply involved, but then they stopped working together shortly before Bill passed away. Maybe a year before Bill passed, over some contractual situation, whatever it might be. I don't think it was ever on bad terms. In fact, I still keep in touch with Mr. Lordi. Whenever he's in town, we try to hook up.
Cool.
Great guy. But yeah, so they worked together for maybe about 2 years, 2.5 years. But yeah, Bill had stopped working with them sometime before he passed away. He had actually picked up Tantric, I believe 6 months before he passed, and he was working with Tantric all
Right.
through that time until he passed.
Yeah, we've had Tantric on the show before. So obviously, when he passed, you said all the original members of Kiss did in some way, it sounds like, pay their respects to him. What about Billy
Yeah.
Idol? Did he have that type of relationship with Billy Idol? Was there any outreach from Billy Idol or even like Steve Stevens when Bill passed on?
It's very strange, Mark. In all the time that I was with Bill, I got to meet a lot of the artists. I got to meet a lot of his friends and people back from the Aucoin management days. I know Bill had rekindled his relationship with Gene and Paul while we were together, and I'd seen him on the phone with Ace and with Peter, on the phone with Billy Squier. We met with Billy Squier a number of times. But there was never any exchange that I saw firsthand with Idol. Which I thought was odd.
Right.
And to this day, the truth is I've never made a direct connection with Idol or with Idol's camp. I believe Bill's nephew, Mark, has had some contact with Idol's management. And in fact, I know they've met with Idol backstage after one of the shows just recently, maybe a couple of years ago,
Okay.
Where Bill's nephew and Bill's sister, Betty, actually went backstage, and I know Betty and Idol were talking. So I'm not sure that the relationship soured so much. But it's a little bit of a mystery to me as to why Bill maintained a line of communication with most everybody, but for some odd reason, Idol just was not one of them. Or maybe he did, and I just was never a witness to it. Honestly, I can't tell you, but it always was a mystery to me.
So you start dating Bill in the 90s when he's no longer this superstar manager. At what point in your relationship do you kind of come to terms with the fact that, yeah, this guy, he was like a Peter Grant, he was like a Colonel Parker or a Brian Epstein? I mean, Bill Aucoin was one of the biggest rock managers of all time. When do you kind of come to terms with that?
It took me a while, and I think it maybe took me a while because I might have been very protective about the whole thing, meaning to say maybe I had a wall up about that whole bit. From the very beginning, obviously, friends of mine in my musical circles down here that play in bands, they knew who he was. But I chalked it up to, well, he was Kiss's manager, and so people want to be associated with that and want to talk to him. So I never quite grasped it from that early on. I think the first wisp that I got of it was when we went to the Super Bowl in 2002 at the Superdome.
Okay.
And we were walking from the French Quarter to the Superdome, and and drinking along the way. And twice he got stopped because he was recognized. And I thought, that just seems kind of unnatural. We're not even in a music environment. You know, we're just walking the streets of the French Quarter heading to the Super Bowl, and he's getting stopped twice. But again, I didn't think much of it because, there's tens of thousands of people, and it might be bound to happen. When the whole equation changed for me was when we decided that we were going to the pyramids of Egypt for the turn of the millennium. And by this point, we're 5 years into this relationship, and I'm thinking this is going to be a great getaway. You know, we'll escape everything, and it's just going to be this great mystical kind of experience to welcome the new millennium. And so we went into the pyramids like camels and all. Talk about corny. But we rode into the pyramids, into the desert, and get to the Great Pyramid of Giza. And this is a couple of days before the New Year.
Okay.
And I don't know if you've ever been there.
No, I have not.
Okay, well, we decide that we're actually going to go into the heart of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Now, in order to do this, you have to climb, over all these boulders, and you climb up, I don't know, I'm guessing maybe like 5 stories. And you come across this opening in the pyramid, and it's this chamber. It's this narrow corridor that leads down to the heart of the pyramid, and it's very narrow. There's a ladder like at a 45-degree angle, and you have to climb backwards, one person at a time. So Bill goes down first, and I take a picture of him going down the corridor, and he gets down there, and then I go down. And, we get into the heart of the pyramid, and it's a chamber about the size of your living room, maybe 2 living rooms put together, and there's dirt, and there's this and that. And we're kind of taking pictures of each other. And going, all right, well, this is kind of cool, but it'd be great if there was somebody here to take a picture of us together. This is before smartphones and the days of the selfies and whatnot.
Right.
So we're hanging out, and they only allow 4 people down there at a time, or at least whatever congregation we were with only allowed 4 people there at a time. So we're hanging out for a couple of minutes, and down comes a young couple from Sydney, and it's this guy maybe in his 20s and his girlfriend, wife, I don't know. And they come down, and I'm like, oh yeah, how you doing? And we tell the young guy, I said, listen, would you mind taking a picture of us? And he goes, sure, mate, absolutely. So he gets our camera, and he puts it up to his face, and I swear it's like out of a movie in slow motion. He starts pulling the camera down off his face, and he says, please excuse me, but I have to ask you, you wouldn't happen to be Bill Aucoin, would you? And I completely lost it, because of all the places, of all the settings, we're in a pyramid that's 5,000 years old. We're in the middle of the Sahara Desert, and there's nobody there but the 4 of us. Excuse me.
That's crazy.
And here's this guy asking, are you Bill Aucoin? And I would have never, ever in my life thought, what are the odds of that? The real kicker to this, and I kid you not, the most hysterical part is that the guy was in the band and he had a demo in his girlfriend's purse, and that just made me lose it. I mean, at that point, it really became comical.
Yeah.
And I do have that demo somewhere in one of my closets, tucked away in a box. And at some point, I got to make a connection with this guy once again. But that was the most hysterical way of realizing, I think, what the power of Bill's magnitude or reach was.
Yeah.
I mean, to almost a comedic level. But that is something that really knocked me upside the head, and something, probably my best Bill Aucoin story that I can think of.
And he's in a pyramid that's 5,000 years old, and he just happens to have a demo on him, and he runs into Bill Aucoin.
I mean, if it's not weird enough that he would recognize Bill Aucoin, what are the odds he's going to... Well, actually, you know what? If someone's going to recognize Bill Aucoin, chances are they are in the band.
Right.
So actually, that part maybe is not quite as strange. But the fact that he'd have a freaking... why would you carry a demo in your girlfriend's purse? Who do you think you're going to meet in Cairo? Unless, I don't know, maybe he did his research and he knew where we were going to be. I don't know. It's pretty hysterical, but the odds are astronomical. And again, I just thought that was just way too cosmic. That was pretty hysterical.
That's great. That's great. Now, obviously Bill was very kind of removed from managing Kiss at the time you were with Bill, the mid-'90s through like 2010. But did you ever have any run-ins when you were with Bill, like with any of the guys in Kiss? Did you ever?
Yeah. Well, again, ironically, the first time, it's funny, being with Bill is an exercise in irony, for whatever that means. But the very first time that Bill and I went to New York together, I think one of our first stops was the Plaza Hotel. And we went to basically just get, an appetizer and a drink, And we sit down at a booth and we order a shrimp cocktail and a couple of drinks. And I'm peeling the shrimp and I'm tossing the shrimp shells at Bill just to screw with him.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Bill gives me this look, as if to say, "Stop." And I think he's just messing with me, like literally stop. And so now I'm eager to try even harder. And he says, "No, really stop." And I'm like, "Oh, what's going on?" And he says, "Don't look behind you right now, but there's Gene Simmons sitting 2 booths behind us, or behind you, behind me, that is." And I'm thinking again, what are the odds that this is the first time I come to New York with Bill, the first place that we hit to have a bite, or a drink, and who's sitting there but Gene Simmons? And at this point, I'd never met any of the guys. So once he said that, I thought, okay, you know what? Now I really have to, because Bill was a sweetheart of a guy, jovial and generous and kind. But every once in a while, he'd like to rip people a little bit just for fun, especially if he felt comfortable with you. So I figured I was going to do the same. So once he told me that, I said, okay, now I'm going to have a go at it. And he said, "No, please really stop." I said, "Okay, fine, I'll keep it cool." So when it was time to leave, I thought we were just going to make an exit. And he says, no, we got to go up and say hi. Now, mind you, this had to be 97, 98. And as far as I know, in the couple of years that we've been together, Bill had not been on the phone with Gene, at least not that I had seen and not that he had mentioned.
So they're into the reunion at this point. This is Ace, Peter.
This was definitely before the reunion.
Okay, so the reunion was 96, so maybe it was like early 96 or 95. Yeah, I'm not sure.
It might have been 95, or maybe it wasn't, but I am pretty certain that this was before the reunion. So,
okay.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the date might have been. But so I think we're going to make an exit, and he says, "No, let's go up and say hi." And of course, I'd heard rumors about Gene Simmons and what he could be like. So we walked 2 booths behind where we were sitting, and Gene was sitting there with what I can only speculate were 2 businessmen. There were Asian guys dressed in suits. And Bill didn't even get to say a word before Gene stood up, and Gene extends his hand. "Bill, how are you?" And he was very cordial. I remember being surprised by how open that whole exchange went, considering the fact that at least I was under the impression that they hadn't talked in many, many years.
Sure.
I was under the impression that maybe they were not on the best of terms. So to see Gene get up and without a word and extend his hand and say, "Bill, how are you?" and in a very cordial tone, not a put on that I could read. And so Bill introduced me, and I don't know, they chatted for maybe about 30, 60 seconds. I can't remember what it was about, but I remember walking away with a very strong sense of, This is not what I'd heard it was. Because if Bill hadn't told me that they were in the outs, certainly people were talking and there were rumors that they were not on the greatest of terms. But I remember walking away from that encounter thinking, wow, this is actually, they seem to be getting on quite well.
Wow.
And I think it was not long after that Gene and Bill, that I remember anyways, witnessing Bill and Gene on the phone talking, and I can't remember what about, but I do believe that was nearing the time of the reunion.
Sure.
Because at that point, it started becoming all-encompassing. Everybody was talking about the reunion, not just amongst our circles, but it was, in the media, it was huge.
Yeah.
The fact that the band was getting back together with the makeup and all that. So,
wow.
yeah, I'm not sure if the conversations on the phone were about that or exactly what they were about, but yeah.
Yeah. Roman, you have some really great stories, and I know we're at the 40-minute mark here, but a couple more questions if you have time. I'd
Sure.
love to just pick your brain on where Bill's legacy can end up. I mean, there's been talk about a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and is that something that you're pushing for? Is there anything the listeners can do to help that cause?
Listen, yeah, that would be phenomenal. I mean, look, my opinion obviously may be biased because I was with the guy for so long. I think there's no denying. I think even the nominating board of the Hall of Fame cannot deny that Kiss is one of the most influential bands of rock and roll. Bill obviously was the man who developed that, and I don't want to be out of place when I say that had it not been for Bill, Kiss may not have realized their fullest potential. There had been talk after Bill passed away of, I think originally this kind of came up when Kiss was nominated to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and then people kind of started saying, well, Bill should be inducted as well. And I think that got certainly my head, thinking about this. And so yeah, we've kind of turned it into a little bit of a thing. We've started a petition, and I know what they've said about petitions in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but this is all about really raising awareness and visibility. Sure. Because I mean, listen, if there's something I can say about Bill's place in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is not just the fact that he developed Kiss. I mean, first of all, he developed 3 acts. These are not acts that were developed that he just happened to manage. There were acts that were basically undiscovered that he developed and made into worldwide multi-million sellers, that being Kiss, Billy Idol, and Billy Squier. 2 of the 3 which are still touring acts and still pulling in money and still touring. So there's that. There's also the fact that, again, like I said, they're multi-million sellers. Obviously of the 3, Kiss has sold, I think, over 100 million records. I'm not sure exactly where Billy Idol or Billy Squier stand.
They both have to be millions and millions. I mean, those Squier
I'm
records.
Sure they're millions.
Yeah, I mean that was yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So there's not only that, but besides the fact that he developed these 3 acts from scratch, there's the fact that both Kiss and Billy Idol were poison to the music industry at their earliest stages. Nobody wanted to touch these people with a 10-foot pole. As it pertains to Kiss, I think the case has been widely documented. Nobody wanted any part of Kiss. Radio didn't want it. Promoters didn't want it. Bill had, as the story goes, actually to put up his American Express card to finance their first tour.
Sure.
So I mean, he had to swim upstream to make that happen. Billy Idol was no different. Billy Idol come from Generation X. He was signed to Chrysalis in the UK. Generation X was about to be dropped. He kind of salvaged the lead singer, brought him to the States, and Chrysalis, stateside, did not want anything to do with Billy Idol. So it's not only that Bill took 3 acts from scratch and turned them into multi-million sellers. 2 of them were completely unwanted by the industry and actually took steps to try to keep them from becoming what they eventually became.
Yeah.
So there's that whole aspect. Then beyond that, there's the fact that Bill started, maybe arguably, maybe not, the first music merchandising empire with Kiss. I don't think I've seen from a merchandising point of view anything as big as the Kiss machine.
Yeah.
I mean, before that, certainly you had, the Beatles had a lot of stuff, but I don't think there was ever an empire, a merchandising empire, licensing empire created like the one that was born out of Kiss. And that was Bill's brainchild. So that was huge. That developed into a whole new revenue stream for the music industry, whereas before it might have been a secondary music stream. Right now, I would venture to say, this is my opinion, that merchandising probably accounts for more money than record sales. Record sales are nowhere. So who's to say how long that might have taken to develop had Bill not come along in 1974, 75 to develop that side of the business.
It's a really good point, yeah.
And then there's the other thing, which is he reinvented the live performance arena. I mean, okay, there were shows, and then there were big shows, and then came Kiss. Now, was it Bill's brainchild to develop every particular, aspect of their live show? No, but he certainly hired some of the best people, and Bill did have this grand vision. Remember, Bill was a vision guy. He was a visual guy, which I keep saying is why I think he wanted to go into TV and film and probably even live theater. So this is something that came very second nature to him. So, and to this day, I mean, you can quote Garth Brooks, who was widely inspired by Kiss's live show. I don't know how many people actually know that, but Garth has made it public. So it's not even just reinventing the live stage as it pertains to the rock genre. I mean, this went across different platforms of music or different genres of music, right down to country, and to this day.
There are even stories out there which I think have a lot of credibility that Michael Jackson was influenced by seeing Kiss and just how visual they were.
Michael Jackson reached out to Bill. Again, I'm not sure if any people know the story. Remember when the Jackson 5 did their reunion tour in '83? They reached out to Bill. I'm not sure if Michael did or if Michael's people. I'm not sure exactly who got in touch with Bill to see if Bill would oversee that reunion tour of the Jackson 5. And again, I mean, if that doesn't put it into perspective, I don't know what does. I don't know why it didn't work out. I'm not sure if Bill was just tied up with Idol or if it was maybe at the tail end of Kiss. I can't, and Bill did tell me that story, and I just cannot remember to save my life. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's a story again that's kind of untold. Listen, I don't mean to stray off the subject very much, but even the Cars, and it's funny, I just corroborated the story with Elliot Easton, the guitar player for the Cars. Before the Cars were the Cars in 1970, I think it was 6 or so. They were trying to get signed, and I forget what name they were going under at the time, and they were playing a show, I think it was at Max's Kansas City, and they were looking to court some kind of a management deal or record deal, and Bill was invited to that show, and I know Bill had a talk with the band afterwards saying, listen, guys, okay, the music's cool and this and that, but visually this is just not working. Something's not making sense here, and I think he said, I think he told the band, this looks like Steely Dan meets New Wave, and it's just not working. Whatever it was, again, Elliot has confirmed the story. And the Cars went back, and I can't say it was solely on the word of Bill, but they went back, kind of reinvented themselves, and came back as the Cars. And ironically, it looks like this year they might be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Again, Bill's reach was far and wide. So again, when you're talking about influence as it pertains to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think influence is one of those factors that I think counts for a lot. Again, not only in developing these 3 acts, 2 of which were unwanted by the industry, building this music merchandising empire, reinventing the live stage. So listen, again, yeah, my opinion may be biased, but apparently there's many people that agree. I think we have close to 3,000 people who have signed the petition.
And where do you sign the petition? Where do you go to sign the petition?
You can go to the Aucoin Globe website. Aucoin Globe was the last company that Bill had before he passed away, and now the website has been replaced completely by the petition to induct Bill. And that is Aucoin, as in Bill Aucoin, AUCOIN, Globe, as in the world, AucoinGlobe.com.
Okay.
And yes, sign the petition. You can leave a comment if you like. Many people have. And again, kudos to everybody who has. including, by the way, I have to give props to David Ellefson of Megadeth.
Oh, nice.
Who has also been a huge support, and again, what a nice guy. But by all means, go online, sign the petition. If you're not quite sure how Bill Aucoin's influence is felt by the music industry, go to the website, and in a couple of paragraphs, it'll tell you, and it'll kind of sum it up. But yeah, had it not been for Bill, I mean, certainly I'm not sure Kiss would be the band they are today. Billy Idol would not be here. Billy Squier probably wouldn't be here. We may not have the kind of live stage performances that we have today, or merchandising as a viable revenue stream in the music industry. So it's huge. I know there's other managers, and again, to quote, I think you were talking about Peter Grant, absolutely, Led Zeppelin, and God knows he did a lot for the industry as well. Right. Shep Gordon is another one.
Alice Cooper.
But I think, but Bill's someone that had to fight tooth and nail to get these acts that were unwanted to not only a successful level, but to a legendary level, and again to reinvent what the music industry was, which is a model that's still, still holding on to this day. So I think his role in the music industry, beyond Kiss, is maybe underestimated. And if nothing else, I think it deserves a second look, because I think these are angles of the music industry that people would not have taken into account when they're talking about inducting Bill into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So yeah, go to the website, aucoinglobe.com, sign the petition, and also there's a Facebook group to induct Bill into the Hall of Fame. You'll see short films there, and you'll see pictures and whatnot. We've been lucky enough to get a lot of artists that are supporting our cause. Most recently, Klaus Meine of the Scorpions. Like I said, Dave Ellefson, who have posed for photographs to endorse Bill's induction to the Hall of Fame. But yeah, go check it out, because I think it's part of a movement, and I'm hopeful that it will happen. I don't know if it will happen this year or next year, but I think it's going to happen, because I think Bill more than left his mark in the music industry.
Absolutely.
Again, nothing against other music managers, but when you add up all the elements, everything he brought into the sandbox, I think it takes. I think it deserves a closer look.
Yeah. Roman, you tell some great stories, and we really appreciate you sharing them here with the Talking Metal listeners and with me. It's just, I love hearing the stuff. And we will have the Facebook group and the website that you mentioned linked through today's show notes on talkingmetal.com. This is kind of off the beating path question. I'm just going to throw it out there. There's been actually 2 books recently written. There's a book called Van Halen Rising by Greg Renoff. There's another book out right now by about Van Halen. The name is slipping my mind, and it's written by Noel Monk, who was their manager. And Bill is mentioned in both of these books. Different stories about him in each one. And in the Van Halen Rising book by Greg Renoff, there's a detailed account of the band's interactions with Bill and ultimately his rejection of Van Halen. And just a devastated Van Halen leaving New York after just kind of being kicked to the curb by Bill Aucoin and even with Gene Simmons as their cheerleader. Did he ever talk about Van Halen?
No. But I got to tell you what's funny.
Right.
Listen, first of all, did you know? Well, you said you interviewed Bill.
Yes. Did
you know him well as a person, or?
I mean, I spent 2 hours with him one day, but besides that, I did not. I can't say that I knew him well, but I did meet him and got to experience some of his personality. Very straightforward guy. I remember after the interview we were done, he was giving me an advice that how I should look a little more rock and roll and needed to kind of work on my image a lot. I mean, meanwhile I had come from my day job, so I had a tucked in shirt and button shirt on. So, but he was a real character, and I'm going to probably dig out that interview that we did with him and put it back on.
By the way, I'd love to check that out sometime.
Absolutely.
If you do dig it out, please point me to it.
Yeah,
but to answer your question, listen, God, I mean, a character. And again, I know my opinion's biased because I was with the guy for so long, but I was with him because he was who he was. I mean, look at the guy was wise beyond belief.
Absolutely,
he was inspiring. He was a jovial personality. He just always made you feel good. But like you said, if he had something to say, he wouldn't beat around the bush. He'd tell you straight up exactly, what was up. But this magnetic personality and so understanding and he was just this great human being and had so many successes that the only thing I could ever bring up when I wanted to bring him down to earth, not that I ever had to bring him down to earth, but when I wanted to jab him a little bit, I'd bring up Halen, and that would piss him off.
Right,
They shut the fuck about Van Halen already. I said, no, but really what? Because Van Halen's a band that I loved. I grew up with Halen.
Right.
And then Bill would roll his eyes and laugh about it. He says, I'm pretty sure that Edward is still pissed off at me to this day because of that. I don't know if that's the case or not. But he didn't walk me through the story so much. He told me probably as much as he's told you, or he's recalled on different radio shows. Where he flew the band out, and the one thing Bill told me is he loved Eddie, and he thought the band was good. He just didn't care for Dave. And
that's the story that's in the one book, the Van Halen Rising by Greg Renoff. That basically it was he blamed things on Dave, which as to why he wasn't interested in the band. And in Bill's defense, Dave did improve tremendously vocally, after that point. I mean, he was already well on his way, but he did continue to improve and really worked hard on his vocals. And some people think that Bill's rejection of Van Halen may have even made David Lee Roth a better singer because he worked that much harder to get his voice in shape. So maybe we have, in a strange way, we have Bill to thank for David Lee Roth's strength.
It's possible. Listen, certainly Dave circa 1976, 77, I don't think was quite the showman that Dave became by the time of, Women and Children or Fair Warning. I think if Bill had seen that Dave, maybe it might have gone down a little differently, and I think Bill does say that was a regret. Well, actually, what he did say to me specifically, he learned a lesson from that whole episode, and he said, what I should have done, I should not have flown the band to my office in New York. I should have flown to Pasadena or I forget what I think it's Pasadena. I should have flown to to California, LA to see them in their natural habitat. And I think that is a lesson he took to the grave, literally, because I don't think he ever flew a group or saw a group outside of their environment after the whole Halen thing. So, at least you could say he learned from his mistakes. And man, that's one he will never live down. and again, no thanks to me, because I would bring it up every once in a while when I wanted to take a little jab at him.
Now, there's this new book out, which is a really good read. I'm not sure how much of it is factual, though, because I think it's Greg Renoff's book is filled with history, but this Noel Monk book, who actually became Van Halen's manager, he has a really fun read out called Running with the Devil. It's out now. It's really doing well, selling well. But he mentions Bill's name later in the game because he didn't really come into the Van Halen fold until after the first record, which would have been a number of years after Bill had decided to pass on them. But he says that after they fired Marshall Berle, or when they were getting ready to fire Marshall Berle, who was Milton Berle's nephew, who was a big L.A. manager, that they were considering going to Bill Aucoin, I guess reapproaching Bill Aucoin again to manage them, but they didn't, and then they ended up promoting their tour manager, who was this guy Noel Monk, who wrote the book. They ended up promoting him to manager, but he specifically says that Edward was bringing up Bill Aucoin's name when they were unhappy. This would have been probably right before the second record came out, when they were or maybe right after the second record, they were unhappy with this guy Marshall Berle. They were bringing up Bill's name. So I don't know if they
curious. That's something
time.
That is the first I've heard of it.
Yeah.
I don't know if they'd ever approached him. Then obviously Bill wouldn't know unless somebody had shared the same story with him. That's interesting. Actually, I'd love to find out if that's indeed the case or not.
Yeah, that's in the Running with the Devil book by Noel Monk, their manager. It's out now. It's a brand new book, not brand new, but came out this year. And I just found it odd because it seemed like they were, he doesn't really talk about the rejection initially because he picks it up, at the first record, which when he started as their tour manager. But he says after that second record came out and they fired Marshall Burl that I believe he says Edward had brought up possibly approaching Bill Aucoin to manage them. But then I guess Dave wanted this guy, Noel Monk, their tour manager, to manage them. And that's actually what happened. Noel Monk took over managing them right up until Dave left the band. I think he was with them until like 85 or something.
Yeah, again, news to me. I had never heard the story, and I'd love to find out if that's indeed the case.
Yeah.
Who knows? Again, that might have been interesting. Where might the band be if that had been the case? Because, again, one thing I know about Bill, and I think it's documented, I think even with when the forces within the band members of KISS were sometimes at odds, Bill was a master at being able to ease each personality to the point where everybody was okay with each other and everybody felt taken care of. And I mean, listen, I only know what I've read about Van Halen's breakup. Well, not breakup, but Dave's departure from the group. And I wonder if Bill actually might have been instrumental, had he been in control of the band, in learning how to compartmentalize, each personality. Because from what I understand, it was really Ed and Dave that had the biggest issue, or whatever the case may be. But based on what I know about Bill's management style, I wonder if that might have ever been avoided if Bill had been looking after Van Halen.
You never know. I mean, what could have been, right? Very well could have.
Might have been a whole different story.
Could have saved Van Halen. Anyways, on that note,
that's one for the history books.
Yeah, the what if history books. But on that note, Roman, it's been so great talking with you. I love these stories, and I know we were talking about doing like 20, 30 minutes. Here we are in an hour, and it just flew by. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, man. Thank you for taking an interest, and and if ever we do it again, and hopefully we'll hook up at some point. Maybe have a. Oh, by the way, Barbara Papa George told me to tell you hello.
Awesome. I love that.
I'm not sure if that's going in the interview or not, but she said, "Oh my God, Mark, he's such a sweet guy," and she was talking about the VH1 days and that. But
we had
in
a
any
good
case,
time at VH1 back in the day. And so, are you working with her on stuff now?
We become really, really good friends, if nothing else. And she is a delightful bad influence on me sometimes. By the way, were you part of the crew that went down to the Bahamas to do a shoot with VH1 one time?
I was at the Keith Richards shoot. I was not. If that's I know they shot Keith Richards in the Bahamas once. I'm not sure if that's what it was.
I don't think that's the episode. Okay, not to worry. I'll tell you about this some other time.
Okay.
But me and Barbara, we become really, really, really good friends. Cool. Well, we have even since Bill was alive. And every time I'm in New York, we try to hook up. And when she comes, she barely comes down here, that bitch. But whenever she does, we hook up. And if not, we talk on the phone at least, whatever. Anyways, we're very, very tight.
Well, that's awesome. And next time you're up in New York, Roman, we definitely have to grab a drink, maybe have some dinner with Barbara. That would be fun to hang out with you guys. And again, thanks.
I think that would be a great picnic. Yep.
Yeah, that would be awesome. And thanks again for these great stories. And we will have the website linked and the Facebook page linked in today's show notes on talkingmetal.com. Again, we're talking. Go ahead.
But again, Bill's birthday is coming up on December 29th. Just for kicks, one of the things that we always do, Bill's friends, myself, on the day of Bill's birthday and on the anniversary of his passing, is we go to our favorite watering hole here in Hollywood on the Intercoastal Waterway, and we raise a toast to Bill. He used to drink sea breezes. If you don't know what a sea breeze is, Google it. Or whatever you have in hand. But it's usually at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on December 29th. We raise a toast to Bill. So
Absolutely.
Again, if listeners want to follow along on the 29th, say happy birthday to Bill, raise a toast at 8 p.m. Eastern Time.
Sounds good. Thank you, Roman, for speaking with us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for taking an interest, Mark.
What you just heard was God of Thunder off of Kiss Alive 2. Let's hit a little Manowar right now here on Talking Metal. This is Metal Days. That was Metal Days by Manowar here on Talking Metal. The moment you've been waiting for. Not over 9 years ago, we did this interview with Bill Aucoin, and I haven't heard it since, so I'm looking forward to listening to it right now with you guys. Let's hit a little Lordi going into the interview, a little sound sample of Lordi, and then we'll hear from Bill Aucoin, recorded in New York City in his office out there in Long Island City, which is a part of New York City, in the borough of Queens. Right across the East River from Manhattan, we recorded this. Yeah, so let's check it out and hit some Lordi going into it. Hit a Kiss classic after it, and we'll talk to you in 2018. All right, guys, be safe on this New Year's Eve coming up, and support Talking Metal. We need your support. You know how to do it. Cool. All right, little Lordi. Thank you.
Hey, it's John Ostronomy. I'm here with Mark Strigl, and we are with one of the most legendary music managers, TV moguls in the world. I've known about this guy since I was in second grade, Mr. Bill Aucoin. How are you, Bill?
How are you?
I'm doing great. What a great office you've got here.
It is fun, but I'm waiting for the hard questions.
Well, this isn't too hard. I hope it's not too hard. But we want to get into a lot of your history, which is just amazing and I'm sure very interesting. But first, let's talk about Modern Times, a great band which John and I have been fans of for a while. Fixer has recently announced that you are managing them. How did you hook up with these guys?
Well, I've known Evan for years, and I kind of was kind of a mentor and also someone who'd tell him the bad news, I think, for years. You know, it's kind of hard. I mean, when you see someone as talented as he is, you really want to help. And, of course, part of helping is also telling an artist when it's not quite up to par, or when if you think it needs changes, or things that could help them succeed. And I think from Evan's point of view, unfortunately, he heard a lot of that from me for years. And finally, the band finally settled down, and the music really came up, and they had a chance to get their first deal. And I really not only enjoy him that much, and I love the band, but I really admire Evan tremendously. Not only is he's a good singer and an extremely good artist, but extremely bright and very aware, and works, I think, 24 hours a day on his career. And that's, to me, is part of the elements that's necessary to become a success today. So when we started talking about management finally, and we've done that for years, and I've kind of pushed it off for years, but since we started a new company called Aucoin Globe, I really wanted to manage them, and so it's finally happened.
Yeah, what an amazing voice on Evan, and definitely a personality, too. We've done interviews with him.
Yeah, Evan has been on our Talking Rock radio show, and we had a blast. And the Rev, the drummer, was on as well.
Now, Bill, you are known for a lot of your history, of course, Kiss in the 1970s and into the early 80s. Billy Idol, you were his manager when he was exploding. And then in the 90s, you seemed, at least to someone like me, to not really be too present in the music industry. What were you up to in that time period?
Well, I did a couple of things. I was out raising money for independent filmmakers. My background has started in film and television. But also, to be honest with you, I was really out of my element with hip-hop. You know, none of the A&R guys really wanted to sign rock and roll. I made a couple of small attempts to say, hey, are you interested? I think this band may work if we all get behind it. No, rock isn't working. We're not really signing rock and roll acts. And I really didn't, although there's some hip-hop I really like, but for the most part, I was really kind of a fish out of water for that. So it wasn't really until the end of the 90s, early 2000 and 2001 that I started to feel that rock was really starting to come back. It might have taken a couple more years, but you could just tell it was time. Plus, there was a generation that really grew up with rock and roll, classic rock and roll. So the generation knew about rock and roll. What was happening was hip-hop, but it was there underground. And the other side of this was that metal never really went away. You two probably know that more than anyone. And that I started to go after again and learn more about it and see what was happening. I also started to get involved just briefly with a band that we eventually signed called Nothing Rhymes with Orange, which is kind of an English-sounding band, but they were from Miami, where I was living. And we brought them over to England, and I hadn't been in England for a couple of years, and I just started to realize again that music never went away there. They never gave up on any music, and the generation after generation still goes to clubs to hear new music. Here a lot of times, if it's not a well-known band or if it's not someone that's been promoted, no one really cares about seeing them. And in Europe, that seems to be the opposite, where kids still seem to be excited about new talent, anything they run into, or if they go to a club some night to hear someone else and they hear a new band, they stay and they listen. So that excited me again. I also started talking to a band called Lordi, which is a band from Finland, with my partner. And I said, this is kind of interesting. And I was told that they were going to be part of Eurovision. And, of course, they then won Eurovision, which is unusual for a monster metal band to win Eurovision. And then I found out that their manager, who initially worked with them, was no longer managing them. Apparently he had gotten ill and so forth. So we went over and actually spent a couple of weeks, also a couple of nights on the tour bus, which I hadn't done for about 20 years. That was exciting. In any case, by the end of that, they asked us whether we would manage them. And I said yes. Ironically, Mr. Lordi was the president of a KISS fan club in Finland. So we had some ongoing things that were mutual. And that developed. We brought them over here. We put them on Ozfest. They toured with O Negative. And they're going to come back again in November for their new album. The single was just released a couple of days ago and entered the charts in Finland at #1. So far, so good.
I've seen performance footage online of Lordi playing in Finland, and it looks like Times Square on New Year's Eve. They are just huge over there.
Well, it is, and of course, when they won Eurovision, when you win Eurovision the following year, they take the whole network show to your town. But the year they won Eurovision, 200,000 people showed up in the main square in Helsinki to see them. And the next year, of course, the whole network television unit came in and they were the hosts of the show. And what happens is that we went and shot a film opening, and then that film opening went into a live performance of Lordi. And for those first 5 minutes of Eurovision that year, 130 million people saw them. So they're very well known outside of North America, or at least the United States, because Eurovision doesn't play here.
Bite It Like a Bulldog is the #1 single right now in Finland by Lordi. And this is a band that John and I got into, and we loved the big hooks that they had, and we saw them on Ozfest in 90-degree weather, probably sweating their asses off in the costumes. And it was just later that we found out that you were involved with them, and it kind of made sense because in a way they kind of brought back the big rock vibe of the 70s in a contemporary way. Is that something that attracted you to them?
Yes, yeah. Obviously, one of the reasons why we developed such a big KISS show back in the 70s was one, because they wanted to, but two, because I came out of television and film as a director-producer, and I didn't see myself sitting behind a desk being a manager. And if you look at any of the records that say Aucoin management in those days, it'll say direction management. And Aucoin management. So from that point of view, I wanted to direct something. I wanted to continue in my field of direction. And so every time we came up with a new idea for the show, the great part about KISS was that they really went along with it. You know, some artists you say, let's try this, and they look at you like you've had three heads, and it just doesn't happen. But in KISS's case, the great thing about those four guys were that they were willing to try anything to make it happen. And their dream, and I can tell you one story, when they were making like maybe $25 a performance, if that, they would save up their money, and for a performance that they really wanted to feel good about, they'd put the money into a limousine so they could drive to this club or this bar to play in a limousine, and they would think in their own minds that it would be like going to Madison Square Gardens, you know, and that's really very special, you know. And some people might say, well, why would they do that? But you know, when you have that in your mind's eye from the very beginning. And I've always told artists, I say, you better see that success in your mind's eye, because there'll be plenty of hills and valleys in between. And as long as your mind's eye keeps pointing in the direction you feel you want to go and where you want to get to, you have a real good shot.
I was going to ask what initially attracted you to KISS, and I think that has got to be the answer. The fact that they always were looking ahead to success, and they were also willing to try anything, everything from breathing fire to just all of the other show ideas that you guys came up with.
There's lots of good stories. I mean, it wasn't all quite as simple, but almost. It's, I had a fire breather come into my office, and he set up his little can of kerosene or whatever it was, and he blew flames. He darkened one of my walls, actually. And the four guys were sitting there, and their eyes were wide as can be. And I turned to them, and I said, well, who wants to try it? And no one did. No one said. I don't think they could believe that I was even thinking of it. And then finally, Gene kind of raised his hand. And that's really why it went to Gene. I'll tell you one other story as well. Gene is always like that. You know, if he thinks it can work and he can be out there, he's going to do it. I had developed something really for Paul Stanley, because Gene was getting so much attention with the fire and the spinning of the blood, that I wanted Paul to fly to the top of the lighting grid to sing a song. And I'm describing this, and Paul said, Gene, I don't know if I really want to fly. Of course, the minute he said that, Gene said, oh, I'll do it. You know, and that's why Gene flew. And, my main concern in many areas, all that was fun, and creating that and making it work. You know, like how we were involved with the first radio guitars and some of the first air guns for confetti and for, all that other stuff that no one had ever done before. So and lasers as well, which didn't work out the initial when we first tried it, but all of that we went through. And doing those shows, especially with a group that would do it, although Gene went to those kind of spectacular things, Paul would do the spectacular jumps and everything else that would be unbelievable. And Ace, of course, we had all the electric guitars with all the lights and everything else, and so he could shoot them, and Peter would go up on the drum riser, and so everyone really had their thing, but everyone went along with it, and of course it worked. It was great.
Literally, bands today really take cues still from the stuff that you guys did, because all of that stuff I don't think had ever been seen before. And I think you guys were the true innovators of a major, big rock show like that.
And even the 80s metal bands, all that was just on the coattails of what you guys were doing in the 70s.
It's interesting seeing all the things that we really developed way back then, and we see them almost in every show now. The fire pods. How many times have you seen those fire pods go out with everyone? And we're the ones that developed it back then. So, it's kind of hard. There's a lot of new things that are happening, not only in 3D and screens and walls that can conform to all sorts of things, which will be exciting in the future. But what we went through and again, it was all because everyone was able to say, let's try it. Whatever it is, if we can do it, we'll do it. And I find that, again, you may not think this, but there are a lot of artists who are afraid to take chances. They really are stuck in their own world. And I always say, listen, and again, something else I told KISS and other artists, look, we're going to fail at some things. And as long as we win more than we fail, we're going to be fine. And with KISS, we were very lucky. I would say we won about 80% of the time. But even if we had won 51% of the time, we would have been ahead of the game. And those other 20% that we really failed or that just fell apart or didn't work, No one even remembers.
Now, had you stopped managing Kiss when you started up with Billy Idol?
No. We actually, the beginning of it's very interesting from my perspective. When a band starts having problems, remember when Peter Criss left the band, and I kind of made a contract for him leaving the band. And then Ace, there was a question about Ace. It's almost like seeing the love of your life or your children kind of falling apart. So that bothered me. And then Gene and Paul really wanted to take off their makeup. And I understood why they wanted to, because obviously everyone else that was having success was known. And they could go out and they weren't known, and they weren't getting that kind of feeling where people would come up to them. So I understood why they wanted to do it. On the other hand, I had spent almost 10 years protecting the Kiss logo and the Kiss faces, and it was the first time that any rock band had ever had their faces copywritten in the Library of Congress. I mean, it took years to do that. Plus, the merchandise was a big part of what they were doing, and also a big part of the money that was coming in every year for them and for all of us. So when they started to talk about that, on top of the fact that Peter had left and that Ace maybe was leaving, it was a little depressing for me. It was a little kind of like, how am I going to keep my energy up if all of this is happening? It's not really the Kiss that I began with. It's changing. Am I going to feel good about it or not? And Gene and Paul came into my office one day and said, well, it's not quite the same. And we kind of sat there, all of us kind of going, oh, my goodness, we knew what was going to happen. We discussed it, and we said we were going to split. And that's how it happened. We're actually closer now, I think, than even then, because then it was more like a manager and artist, and now it's really just friends, and they're really, really close friends. But that was that. At the same time, I had gone to see this band called Generation X in the middle of the winter, playing on the Isle of Wight in the middle of the winter, which is not a fun place to be. And the reason is that one of the owners of Chrysalis had said, we're gonna let Generation X go, but we get this front kid called Billy Idol that he's really talented, but we have no idea what we're going to do with him. But we thought maybe you could think of something or work with him or whatever. And so I went to the Isle of Wight in the middle of the winter. I saw him and I said, oh yeah, he's a star. And I went back to the company and I said, yeah, I think we've got something here. Let me come back to England when Billy gets off tour and talk to him. So I did, and I said, would you consider coming to the States? And Billy said, no, I'm going to do another Generation X album. Now I already knew that they were going to let Generation X go. So I didn't want to disappoint Billy, but I said, okay, well, if the next Generation X album doesn't work, would you come to the States? And he said yes. So I went back to Chrysalis and I said, we're going to do another Generation X album. They looked at me cross-eyed and said, no, you don't understand, Bill. We're going to release Generation X. I said, no, you're not. You're actually going to do another Generation X album, and I'm going to use it to put a team together for Billy. And so we did it, and songs like Dancing with Myself came out of it and a few others. And I put Keith Forsey. I brought Keith Forsey in. Keith was the drummer and assistant to Giorgio Moroder on Donna Summer's albums. And Giorgio kept telling me, I've got this young guy who's just so super talented. I really think he's going to be a great producer. And so I sent Keith 3 tapes. I forgot who the other 2 artists were. And I said, pick one, and you'll have a chance to produce. And he picked Billy, which is the one I wanted him to pick, but I wasn't sure. Anyway, so I brought him to England. He did the Generation X album. We kind of started putting the team together. And, of course, I knew that Chrysalis wasn't going to promote it. So that kind of died. And then I brought Billy to the States and signed him to Chrysalis Inc. over here from Chrysalis Limited in England. And they hated me, actually. They thought it was over. And they said, well, just because you know the owners of the company doesn't mean that we have to deal with this artist. It was over. And they were releasing Gen X, and, punk music didn't work in the States, and now we have to deal with it. Ooh, wow, that wasn't a great awakening. So they wouldn't even let me do a new album. We made a compromise. We'll just do an EP. And that EP, ironically, had Money Money on it, the first song we recorded. And after we did the EP, And if you remember the picture of Billy with the spiked hair and everything up and everything, I got a call from the head of promotion at Chrysalis in L.A., and he said, "Are you going to be in L.A.?" And I said, "Well, if we're going to talk about the release, I'll come to L.A." And so I went to L.A., and he said, "Bill, I'm going to be very honest with you because I know you know the owners of the company, but I'm not going to promote this album." And I have a very dry sense of humor, so I'm thinking, this guy, we'll get along fine. He's got a good dry sense of humor. And then I realized it wasn't a sense of humor. He was serious. And I'm sitting there in shock. And he said, "Look, this is not the right image for Chrysalis. We have really significant artists, and I can't put this out with this kid with the spiked hair and stuff, this punk rocker. This is just not good for Chrysalis. I don't want to ruin Chrysalis's reputation at radio." Wow. So I'm sitting there going, I'm like, whoa. Now, in those days, I knew that any significant single would have significant money behind it, and because obviously, and that in those days, don't forget, that was like in the beginning of the 80s. If a company was really behind a single, probably a promotional budget would be about $250,000, about $250,000. And so I said, "Okay, well, I want the promotional budget." And he said, no, this can't go to radio. And I said, "I will not spend a penny on radio." So he kind of had to give in a bit and stuff. So basically, I walked out saying, "Oh, what are we going to do?" And we came up with an idea I thought that actually worked, but we didn't know it at the time, which was to bring in certain DJs at some of the big clubs around the country and say, "Listen, come on to New York. We're going to wine and dine you. You're going to do your own mix of Dancing with Myself, and you'll go back and have it with you," and so forth. So everyone said yes, of course. And they went into the studio and mixed it with Billy and Keith and everything. And of course, they left with our mix. They didn't know that, but they went back. They went back and they played it day and night. I mean, every night they were playing it. Yeah, right. Great. And so about 2 weeks later, I get a call from the head of promotion. "I don't know how you did this. I don't understand how this happened, but we're getting calls from radio stations why we haven't serviced the Billy Idol song." So it worked in reverse, where radio started calling Chrysalis and saying, "How come you haven't serviced us this? Everyone wants to hear it." So, you never know what's going to happen. With Kiss, no one liked Kiss. No makeup band was ever going to make it. Radio thought for sure it was a loser. Most magazines didn't. In fact, I have to tell you, Jan Winter at Rolling Stone made a decree that no one should ever put Kiss in Rolling Stone, period. And as of today, he still won't do it. In fact, he's on the Grammy board, and he always votes against anything that Kiss, the Rock of Fame, rather.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and always votes against Kiss.
I think I read an article where he said as long as he's on that board, he will never even let them get to be nominated.
Correct, yeah. And so, it'll eventually happen, but yeah. And so it was, it had gone through a lot of strange things,
One of the first concerts that I ever saw in my hometown, which is called Johnstown, Pennsylvania, which I know Kiss has played back in the Destroyer tour, was Billy Idol when Rebel Yell was happening. I remember I had the shirt, and so that was one of my earliest concerts.
Ironically, how strange is it that Billy Idol graced the cover of a Rolling Stone in a leather jockstrap, which was then banned in many towns. It was famous. We were famous for doing things that are slightly off center. And but Billy's great. Billy's a great performer. He gives everything for his performance. But I must tell you that when he came over here, I asked him, well, what are you going to need to live every week? He gave me a figure that you would have laughed at. Practically nothing, right? And I remember going to see where he was living. Had a mattress on the floor of an apartment that had more roaches than there were people. But he was happy. He was going out every night. It was New York. And when I finally got out of the business at the end of 87, 88, I told Billy, I said, the one thing I don't think you should ever do. He didn't pay attention to this, but I said, I don't think you should ever leave New York. I think if you go to L.A., they're going to eat you up and spit you out, because L.A. happens to be what's new, when and next, and here's Billy Idol with a hit album, with a new album coming out, good-looking guy, has all the attributes for Hollywood, And I think in many ways it hurt him. I mean, that's my own opinion, because I think it took that real street sense that he always had, and which continued in New York City, that you really don't have in L.A. But, that's what's happened, and it's kind of sad. I talk to him every once in a while, but not as close as Gene and Paul.
And when did Steve Stevens come into the mix, and where did you guys find him?
Steve was interesting. Steve was involved with a little pop band here in New York. And I went to see him a few times, and I wasn't sure of the band, but I was damn sure of Steve Stevens. And so eventually, we just signed Steve, and not knowing what we were going to do with Steve, to be honest with you. And when Billy Idol came over, we had to put a band together for him. And I said, well, I'd like Steve Stevens to be in your band. Well, I don't know. I don't know. Is he a real good guitarist? Yes, he's a good guitarist. Well, let's see. So we started playing. Billy would come back and say, I don't think Steve Stevens. So what do you mean you don't think Steve Stevens? This is really, he's got unique ideas and everything. Plays too much. He's not real rockabilly. Plays too much. And of course, it all worked eventually. I'll tell you one story about being at a studio, Electric Lady actually, and we're doing the album. And Steve has, by that time, he's got his first guitar. Kramer. It's a Steve Stevens guitar, and it's multicolored, and he is just beaming. He is beaming. And we're there, and he's, look at it. Oh, isn't this great, Bill? And wow, that's been incredible. And Billy walks in, and he sees this shiny new multicolored guitar, and he takes his keys out and scratches it. No. Right, yeah. And Steve is almost in tears now. You can see the tears coming to his eyes, and he turns and, why'd you do that? And Billy says, rock and roll isn't pretty. And he just walked into the control room. And I said, oh, my God. But that was Billy. Billy was very real. Whatever was on his mind, it came out, and that's it. And that was great about him. And I think that it helped a lot. But I really do think that Billy got a lot of his energy and his ability to come up with ideas for songs from the street and from people he hung out with and dealt with their problems as well as his problems and, anything that happened. And that was the magic. That was really a magic. And when he didn't, I'll give you an example. A lot of times, because of his energy, he would get 3/4 of the way through something or 80% through, and that would be it. I don't know. It's not going to happen. I don't know. Well, based with Steve and Keith, the rest of the team would kind of fill in, and which would make it work, and probably more powerful than most people would know. There was one story. We're out at Westlake in L.A., and I'm listening to tracks, and Keith says, we got this song called White Wedding. This was before, probably, White Wedding. And I think, I didn't play it for you because I think it's not going to go on the album. I said, well, I want to hear it. So we played it. So see, it doesn't quite hold together, and I'm thinking to myself, this is just incredible. And so they're ready. Billy doesn't want to work at it anymore. Keith is frustrated. He doesn't want to work at it anymore. So I finally, on the way out of the studio, I said, Keith, everything's great. I really like it. You will do White Wedding. And he said, oh, Bill, no. I said, I don't care what you have to do. You bring in anyone from anywhere, I don't care. You're going to do White Wedding. And he brought in a keyboard player from Germany that Giorgio Moroder had used on Donna Summer. And that was the key. The guy came up with a line and this and that, and it all kind of fell together, yeah.
Speaking of Steve Stevens, and also speaking of the fact that when you work with new artists like Evan from Fixture, you tell them the truth, and you tell them when they're good and when they're bad, and I think that's very important. And I've got a great story that you may or may not even remember. I went out to see Van Halen with Jeanette Fraley and Lydia Chris once, and Steve Stevens was with Vince Neil at the time, and Vince came off stage, and, I think Vince Neil is great, but everybody, of course, will go up to people and say, oh, you're so good, I love you, and when you were speaking to him, I overheard, and you said, Vince, you were not on tonight, and you really need to work on this, and I just thought it's great that, although you weren't managing him, you gave him some constructive criticism.
Yeah, I mean, they always kind of remember that. I did that to a number of artists that remember it every once in a while. When I managed Billy Squier, Billy, I'll tell you a story about that. Billy, I managed, signed him when he was in Boston and brought him to New York, and he didn't want to be Billy Squier. He said, no, I need a band. I really need a band, Bill. And I said, well, okay, we'll put a band. Now, the band was Piper. Piper, right. Yeah, and the truth of the matter is Billy is just super talented and has and bright, and he knows really what he wants to do. And I think he was a little uncomfortable putting himself out there first, so that's how Piper happened. When Piper didn't really break, I told Billy, I said, I think you're too strong. I think it has to be Billy Squier. You're never going to be happy under another name and with other people having as much power as you have in your group. And that's what happened. It took a while, but he finally did, and of course it was a success. But yeah, there are certain things you see in artists that you absolutely know why they have to change or why it has to go on. The one thing that always gets thrown at me, of course, was that I didn't sign Van Halen. And I have to tell you, today, if I see Eddie will turn around and won't look at me and walk away. Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's the only one, but even to today. And it was very strange. I learned a big lesson. When Gene came and said this group, I said, yeah, I heard of them. I heard their name in L.A. when I was in L.A. and so forth. And I said, okay, we'll fly them to New York. Big mistake. You should never, as a manager, you should never let an artist come to where you're at. You should always go to where the artist's at and see with their fans and their interaction, where they're most comfortable. So I brought them to New York, put them in SIR. And they were nervous. Dave didn't really sing that well. You know, Dave never had a great voice, but he was a great rock and roller, and it all worked together. And even Eddie was, he's supposed to be a phenomenal guitarist. Well, I don't know, okay, And I like his guitar playing, but how about the whole thing? So I said no. Well, of course, that came to haunt me over and over and over. And to the point where, as I said, Eddie won't talk to me till today. Anyway, so years later, I'm at Warner Brothers. And Ted Templeman and I go out for lunch. And we're talking about everything. And I'm saying, boy, I have to tell you, Ted, I paid dearly for not signing Van Halen. I mean, in many ways. And he said, I didn't want to sign Van Halen. I said, what do you mean? He said, I just wanted to sign Eddie. But the band wouldn't go without Dave. And I said, I didn't want Dave to sing. He didn't have a voice. And I'm saying, oh, my God. And so after he told me the whole story, it was almost what I had thought, but he wanted to sign him, and because he wanted Eddie so bad, he signed the whole band. And then, as you know, he did the first few singles himself. He's the one who brought the songs in and actually did them. So they were very lucky to have a great producer and have Warner Brothers behind him, because not only is Ted Tillman a great producer, but he is a key component at Warner. So whatever Ted wanted to do, the whole company did. So they had the best of all worlds. But I didn't get to manage them, so there.
One of the greatest rock records of all time, Quadrophenia by The Who, is, from what you told me before the interview started, is going to be coming to the stage. Can you tell us about this and your involvement with it?
Yeah, well, I have actually a gentleman from the West Coast. His name is Bill Schultz, who actually is in the medical field, but he was from Minneapolis, and he went to the West Coast because he always wanted to be a screenwriter. And, of course, he couldn't get a job. And he had worked for 3M in Minneapolis. So he went to 3M out there saying, I really need a job. So they gave him a job. And he got to know the medical field. They made all sorts of apparatus, for replacement of shoulders and elbows and hips and everything else. And he finally left, started his own company, became a multimillionaire, very successful. And one day, a friend of mine said, maybe you should meet this Bill Schultz. He really wants to do something. The Who is his favorite band. So I went out to meet him, and he said, I always thought Quadrophenia would be a great show, and I'd really want to put it on. And I said, well, it's not that easy, but let's discuss it. And so I became his associate producer on the project, and we actually put it on about 8-9 times out on the West Coast, in L.A. and in Orange County. And then we had to get to Pete Townsend. Oh, yeah. Pete said, no, don't want to do it. And basically said, stop, that's it, I don't want you to do it anymore, and so forth. So we kind of went through that whole thing. And then after a period of time, Pete came back, because he had heard so many good things about the show. Said, well, maybe we'll do it. And that took months and months and months and months, and it finally just came to fruition a couple of weeks ago. And it's going to open, Quadrophenia is going to open outside of London on May 15th, 5/15, the song and next year. And we're going to bring it all through Europe. And then Pete has pretty much said that if it all goes together, we'll bring it to the States and go around the world with it, and then maybe even bring it to Broadway. So there's a lot of steps in between, but it actually it's in the works now, and it'll open in May of 2009.
You know, Bill, it just seems like every project you get involved in, there's some great story around it, and then it goes, super big. Now, are there any bands that you really believed in that didn't really take off?
Well, there are things that happen. There was a band, when you have a company, you have other executives in it, and they have ideas about what they'd like to sign. New England was a band that my head of promotion said, "Hey, I think we should look at them." And then Ron Luxembourg, who was starting a new label, Infinity, with Universal, with tons of money behind him, and said, "I want to sign them." Chrysalis also wanted to sign them, by the way, and I said, "Yeah, okay, we'll do it." And they had a couple songs I thought were very good. This is a good lesson to learn. The band wasn't getting along with each other when we signed them, but they had made a pact never to let me know. So it was strained from the beginning, and yet they had this deal, and they had this great deal, and everything else, and Aucoin Management was managing them and everything. When Infinity, everything fell apart at once. The band wasn't getting along. It finally started showing. Infinity was having problems. Ron was having problems with the amount of money he spent from Universal, and they were kind of shutting him down. It was kind of like a disaster all at once. It just imploded. So that was one. And then there was a band that I really loved from San Antonio called Toby Bo. Just an incredible band, a country rock band. We signed them to RCA, and RCA thought, boy, this could be a huge band for us. Brought them to Europe, did everything else. We got through the first album. We're going to the second album and stuff. And the lead writer in the group, which was the guitarist, who wrote the songs, really very good, says, I really don't like this, and I don't like touring, and I really don't think this is it. I'm going to go back to San Antonio. So he goes back to San Antonio and literally gets a job working at a record store. And again, it was kind of like, whoa, hello. There's the guts of the group gone, and it was one of those crazy moments. And at the same time, this was happening at the same time when Kiss was kind of going through, are we going to stay together? Aren't we going to? What's going to happen? Is Ace leaving? If not, Peter's to this and that. Gene and Paul are unhappy. I said, oh, boy. So I have to say that with all the turmoil going on at the time, I didn't really try to save it, especially with the key guy in the group gone. Then you're into finding songs, and if you don't have this and if you don't have that. But they were a phenomenal group, and I thought they could have been a major success. That was really probably my biggest disappointment. There was I'll give you one other story. Boy, you're getting everything out of me. I don't have to do the book now. I managed Manowar for a short time, and I was signed to EMI Records. And they're now on a major tour, and they're opening up, and we're in an arena in, I think, Houston or Dallas. I forgot which one it was. And the head of A&R from EMI comes out and wants to discuss things and everything. So they play. They come off. We're up in the dressing room, and he's telling them what he thinks has to be done. And the band says, screw you. We don't have to do that. We're not going to do it. So I'm thinking to myself, well, that's the wrong way to handle this. But I'm trying to calm everyone down. I walk out of the dressing room, and the head of A&R says, they're off the label. Wow. One meeting, they're off the label. I don't want to see them again. They're off the label. So I had to walk back into the dressing room and say, well, guys, I think you might have taken this a bit far. Well, what do you mean, Bill? We don't have to do that. I said, well, no, you don't have to do that because you're off the label. So that was, you never know when, life is kind of a ride anyway, that was kind of a surprise. So everything went from shooting sky high and having everyone behind them to everything just collapsing. So, yeah.
when you were talking about bands like New England who were not getting along with each other, and when certain members want to leave, and it happened to Kiss, what I think was one of the best ideas, and I'm thinking it was probably your idea, that helped Kiss stay together for so long, was having them split all of the money. Did you come up with that?
Yeah, I forced that at the beginning. I always felt that, and I still believe today, although believe me, I haven't been able to do that with other groups, that the only thing that could destroy them was money, if one person was making so much more money. So I made them split everything equally. Now, in the years to come, when Peter left and then Ace, of course, Gene and Paul were never going to do that again. And, of course, they were the real key to the group anyway. But nevertheless, and I think it helped. And, of course, when you start hearing, even when they split everything equally, when all of them had pretty big money in their pocket, it became like, do we have to do another tour right now? And the idea was to do solo albums to kind of let them get out of their system, each one of them, what they wanted to do, whatever their hang-ups they thought in their head, or the music they really wanted to do, whatever that might be. Let's do the solo albums. And initially we were going to do one solo album at a time, one album at a time. And I said, well, that's kind of, I'm not sure we can do that, Neil. Neil Bogart is what. And I said, one at a time. I think maybe we should see if we can do them all at a time. And Neil said yes. Probably wasn't the right idea, but nevertheless he said yes. So anyway, we're about to put him out, and one distributor, I think it was Handelman at the time, called the head of sales, called Casablanca, and said, we'll take 1 million units. Well, that just didn't happen. Neil went absolutely out of his mind. They were taking 250,000 of each of the albums, and Neil just went. I mean, it was like heaven had blessed Casablanca. No one orders 1 million units, and so he decides, well, if Handelman's ordering 1 million, let's press up a couple more million because everyone's going to want them. So what happened was, and this is the story in the industry, that we shipped gold and everything came back platinum, and what would happen is there were so many units out there. You'd walk into a record store and Kiss albums were piled 4 or 5 feet high from the floor, all Kiss, and even if you bought 20 of them, it still looked like that wasn't selling, and so it was a disaster initially. Now they all went platinum
eventually.
Yeah, but it really was. It was the laughingstock of the industry. Shipping gold, coming back platinum. You can imagine, and so we all had to live through that. But and I think most labels would have really had a rough time. Neil Bogart was very special. He was one of these record music people who knew music. He was a singer himself, had his own single out years before. And he really kind of knew it and felt it. And two things that were great about Neil. One is his word was his bond. There's a lot of things that Neil and I shook hands on that you didn't need a piece of paper for. And there was even one time when Neil and I made a decision to do something. And I went down to talk to his in-house lawyer about send me a memo on it. And he tried to change the deal. And I got Neil on the phone, and Neil said, let me talk to him. And he just laid into him. He said, when I give my word, that's it, period. So that was one thing. And the other thing was that Neil was always thinking about new ideas. And we'd talk about it no matter what it was. And if we just thought it was crazy enough or wild enough or that it would get noticed, we would do it. And even if it costs money and that most people wouldn't do, And there was a time when Warner's event gave Neil his first monies to start Casablanca. Oh, this is another story. But they didn't like Kiss. Like most people in the industry, they thought this was just foolishness. And we went out to play a showcase for Warner's at a hotel in L.A. And they saw him, and Kiss was nervous, and the sound system was just horrible, and they played too loud, and it was just noise, basically. So, I mean, I knew it wasn't good, but didn't really say anything at that point. And and what happened is that one is from the president's office sent a memo, an internal memo saying, don't work Kiss. We really believe in Neil Bogart. He's going to come up with some great artists, but we're not going to work Kiss. Well, by that time, Neil had schmoozed everyone at Warner's, so someone passed him the memo. He was furious. So he walked into to Mo Austin and Joe Smith's office. They were co-presidents of Warner's at the time. Said, "How can you do this to me? You're undermining my company before you begin." I mean, you know, and I think they talked about, well, maybe they should take off their makeup, maybe this. Neil called and said, well, Warner's doesn't like their makeup. Well, they take off their makeup. And we were working on the show at the old Fillmore, the Fillmore East. It had closed down, and we had taken it over. And I said, Neil, it's not going to happen, but I'll ask them because you asked me, and I'll ask them. And I asked the guys, and of course we all said no. And I called Neil back and said, no, they don't want to take off the makeup. So he went back to Warner's and said no, basically worked out a deal to leave Warner's, and mortgaged his home to keep Casablanca going. You know, all around Kiss. There's so many stories around Kiss you can't imagine.
On the same tip, didn't you once finance a tour on your Amex card?
Yeah, well, when Neil left and he mortgaged his home to keep the company going, basically there wasn't any money. I mean, just to keep the company going. And he had brought a lot of friends from New York who moved out, had homes and kids and families. So he went to pay their salaries and everything. And so we came to a tour. And there was no money. So I put it on my American Express card, and I'll make this quick. I had never spent more than $100, maybe. I mean, that was a lot to spend on my Amex card for myself. And the month I did the tour was $25,000. And I remember the call when they called and said, Mr. Aucoin, do you expect to pay this? Absolutely. Yeah, I had. And a couple of weeks later I called and said, oh, my God, all these problems there. But don't worry, I won't use my Amex card, but I will pay the bill. And believe it or not, they never took the Amex card away from me. Today they'd be gone like that. And about a month later, we got our first big check. So we went from being completely broke, I mean broke, to getting $2 million. So
wow,
yeah.
Great story.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for joining us, and some great stories. And we'd love to have you back at some point for more great stories.
Yeah, absolutely. We could just sit here all day, and you've got to write a book.
Well, I've been asked a couple of times. I haven't. My line to most publishers is I have to wait for one more person to die. So, yeah. All right. Anyway.
Thanks, Bill.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Bill, and we will definitely see you soon.